For 2 years, CEO Alexandra barely knew William existed. He was the quiet single father who fixed machines, always leaving before anyone could thank him. Tonight, at an upscale restaurant, Alexandra saw William in a dark suit, sitting across from Andrea, a beautiful woman holding his hand. William smiled, his eyes warm in ways they never were at the office. Alexandra's breath caught. If he belonged to someone else, what had she missed? Alexandra was jealous, but she didn't even remember his name, and she didn't know. William was meeting Andrea about something that could bring down the entire company. Alexandra Hayes had become CEO at 34 after a brutal power transition that left half the executive team reassigned and the other half resentful. The board had chosen her for her efficiency, her ability to make decisions without hesitation, her refusal to let sentiment cloud judgment. She lived by cold rules, fast decisions, and hard numbers that could be measured, tracked, and optimized. She hated emotional complications with an intensity that bordered on phobia, and the reason lived in her memory like a permanent scar. She'd watched her mother fall into depression after a shattered marriage, watched a strong woman become a shell of herself over a man who'd promised forever and delivered abandonment instead. Young Alexandra had made a vow then: never be weak, never be vulnerable, never let anyone have that kind of power over you. The belief had rooted deep in her mind, growing into the foundation of everything she built. Weakness gets left behind. Employees are just positions on a chart. Love is a liability that successful people cannot afford. She ran the company the way she ran her life, with precision, distance, and an unwavering focus on results. None truly knew her. William Carter was 36, a night shift maintenance technician who stayed quiet, kept things clean, and never fought for credit. He raised his 7-year-old daughter Louisa alone, a responsibility that shaped every decision he made, every hour he worked, every sacrifice he accepted without complaint. He always carried his phone on emergency mode, terrified the school might call at any moment with news of an accident, an illness, some crisis that would require him to choose between his child and his job. That fear lived in his chest like a constant weight. William had once been exceptional at his work, the kind of engineer who saw solutions others missed, who built systems that lasted. But he'd buried himself after a tragedy that changed everything, choosing invisibility over ambition because visibility meant risk, and risk meant losing the one thing he had left. Louisa was unusually perceptive for her age, understanding things so deeply that she pretended to be fine when she wasn't. She'd learned to read her father's moods, to sense when money was tight, to know when he was tired even though he smiled. Her greatest fear was simple and devastating: that her father would disappear like her mother had, that one day she'd wake up and he'd be gone too, leaving her completely alone. The company's power structure shaped everything that happened within its walls. George was the chief financial officer, a brilliant manipulator who controlled numbers like weapons, who could make profits appear or vanish depending on how he framed the data. He'd built an empire of influence through favors, secrets, and carefully constructed narratives that positioned him as indispensable. Vanessa directed communications and public relations, close to Alexandra, expert at polishing the company's image until it gleamed. She knew how to spin disasters into opportunities, how to control the story before it could control them. Her loyalty appeared absolute, but it actually belonged to whoever held power. Henry served as chief operating officer, practical but still possessing a conscience that occasionally troubled him. He saw more than he said, understood more than he revealed, and carried the burden of knowing things he couldn't yet prove. Otis chaired the board of directors, caring only about deals and profits and quarterly reports that impressed shareholders. He'd placed Alexandra in power because she delivered results, and he'd remove her just as quickly if those results stopped coming. Amanda ran human resources, seeing William's struggles but lacking the authority to help. She processed his schedule change requests, watched him accept unfair treatment, noticed the exhaustion in his eyes, and felt powerless to intervene against George's interference. Alexandra ignored William for reasons that made perfect sense to her. George and Vanessa had defined him from the start as just a maintenance worker who complained too much, who constantly requested schedule changes, who lacked the dedication that serious employees demonstrated. Alexandra was used to seeing people through files and performance indicators, not with her own eyes. She trusted her executives to filter information, to bring her only what mattered, to handle the mundane details that didn't require her attention. William actively made himself invisible because he didn't want anyone noticing his private life or his daughter. Attention meant questions. Questions meant explanations. Explanations meant revealing vulnerabilities that could be exploited. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. There was an old file locked in the HR system related to William, tagged as confidential and restricted. The approval signature on that file belonged to George, and the date went back 3 years, to a time when William had been someone different, before tragedy had reshaped his world. William had saved the company more times than anyone knew, performing miracles in the shadows while others took bows in the light. The night the data warehouse lost power during a critical backup cycle, he'd run alone to the technical floor and rescued the system before it could catch fire or explode, working in darkness with nothing but his phone, flashlight, and his knowledge of every wire, every circuit, every potential failure point. He'd saved 6 months of irreplaceable data, and nobody knew his name. When the elevator jammed with a group of executives trapped inside, Alexandra only noticed the lights coming back on, heard the relieved voices, saw people stepping out safely. She never knew who fixed it, never asked who'd climbed into the shaft to manually release the brake, who'd risked his safety to ensure theirs. During a critical demonstration for partners who could make or break a major contract, equipment malfunctioned 30 seconds before the presentation. William repaired it in 90 seconds flat, his hands steady and sure, before stepping back behind the curtain where he belonged. The demonstration succeeded. Alexandra shook hands with the partners. William went back to checking inventory. Alexandra unconsciously expected everything to work smoothly. She took it for granted, the way people take air for granted, never noticing it until it's gone. The systems functioned because someone made them function. The building stood because someone maintained it. The daily operations continued because people like William showed up and did work nobody else wanted to do. Louisa appeared indirectly in these moments, a ghost presence that shaped her father's choices. William requested schedule changes to pick up his daughter from school, to take her to doctor appointments, to be present for the parent-teacher conferences that mattered so much to her. HR Director Amanda tried to process these requests with compassion, but George dismissed the paperwork, marked it as low priority, suggested that people who couldn't commit fully to their jobs should find other employment. William accepted unpaid overtime to avoid drawing attention, swallowing his pride because pride didn't pay for groceries or rent or the health insurance that kept Louisa safe. He learned to ask for nothing, expect nothing, need nothing, becoming so invisible that even his name faded from memory. Vanessa planted seeds carefully, dropping comments to Alexandra over coffee or during car rides between meetings. She told Alexandra not to worry about people like William, that they only caused trouble, that they viewed accommodations as weaknesses to exploit rather than necessities to balance. The message sank in through repetition, becoming assumed truth. Henry accidentally discovered a technical report bearing William's name while searching through archived files for something unrelated. The innovation described in the report was brilliant, the kind of forward-thinking solution that could save millions. But when Henry checked the current version of the file, the author had changed. The finance department was now credited with the work. The original submission date had been altered. William's contribution had been erased as thoroughly as if he'd never existed. Henry said nothing yet, but he kept a copy of that report hidden in his personal files. The restaurant ambush happened on a night when Alexandra was meeting Otis and potential investors to discuss selling part of the company, a move that would bring in capital but dilute control. The setting was elegant, upper class, exactly Alexandra's world, the kind of place where power brokers made deals over wine that cost more than most people earned in a week. And then she saw William belonging there, sitting at a table near the window with the city lights glittering behind him like stars. The shock hit in 3 layers, each one dismantling assumptions she hadn't known she'd made. First, why is he here? It shattered her unexamined belief that maintenance workers stayed in maintenance worker spaces, that class lines were firm and uncrossable, that someone like William didn't dine at restaurants like this. Second, why is he dressed like that? William wore a dark suit, impeccably tailored, the fabric expensive and well-fitted, his posture calm and composed. He looked like he belonged, like he'd been born to rooms like this, and the cognitive dissonance made Alexandra's mind stutter. Third, who is the woman holding his hand? Andrea was beautiful in an understated way, elegant without trying, leaning close to speak in tones too low for Alexandra to hear. Their intimacy was obvious, comfortable, the kind that came from trust and time. Details made Alexandra feel genuine jealousy, a hot, uncomfortable emotion she wasn't accustomed to experiencing. Andrea leaned close and spoke softly, her expression serious. William listened with complete attention and nodded like a man being respected, being valued, being seen as an equal. His opinion mattered to this woman in ways it clearly didn't matter at work. William smiled, and that smile broke something in Alexandra's chest. That smile was nothing like his silence at the office, nothing like the neutral expression he wore when passing her in hallways. This smile was warm, genuine, unguarded. It transformed his face, revealed a person Alexandra had never glimpsed, suggested depths she'd never imagined. She felt like she knew nothing about him at all, and worse, like she'd never tried to know. Her water glass trembled slightly in her hand. She looked away, forcing her attention back to Otis and the investors. But her eyes returned against her will, drawn to the sight of William being treated like someone who mattered. Alexandra caught fragments of Andrea's voice during a lull in her own conversation, just enough to hear. "Tomorrow, if you sign these papers, George will have nowhere to run." The words made no sense in the context Alexandra understood. George was her CFO, her right hand in financial matters, trusted and essential. What papers? What did William have that could threaten George? From that night forward, Alexandra started paying attention to William with an intensity that felt almost obsessive. She asked Vanessa the next morning, trying to sound casual. "What's that technician's name?" "The one who works nights?" Vanessa deflected smoothly, tried to steer the conversation away toward more important matters. She suggested Alexandra shouldn't waste mental energy on lower-level employees, that there were bigger priorities, that delegation existed for a reason. But Alexandra persisted until Vanessa relented with visible reluctance. "William Carter. He's in maintenance. Why do you ask?" Alexandra didn't answer, but her mind was already moving, planning, calculating. She did something wrong but very characteristic of a CEO operating on incomplete information and unexamined jealousy. She called William up to her office and assigned him difficult work under the pretense of testing his capabilities, projects that required him to stay late, to report directly to her, to remain visible and accountable. The real reason: she wanted to keep him in her sight, pull him away from that other woman, prove to herself that he was nothing special, just another employee who'd gotten lucky with a good suit and an expensive dinner. William's response was logical, measured and utterly deflating to her unstated hopes. He didn't flatter or show fear or seem impressed by her attention. He only asked, "Will I be allowed to keep a schedule that lets me pick up Louisa?" The question should have been reasonable, a parent asking for basic accommodation. But Alexandra felt her pride stung, her ego bruised by his apparent indifference to her interest. She assumed he was leveraging a new relationship to make demands, using his connection to this Andrea woman as leverage against company policy. She'd completely misread the situation, but she didn't know that yet. George exploited the opportunity immediately, with the instincts of a predator sensing wounded prey. He spread information through carefully selected channels, suggesting William was colluding with outsiders against the company, possibly selling proprietary information, definitely becoming a security risk that needed addressing. The rumors spread like disease through the office ecosystem, whispered in break rooms and forwarded in encrypted messages. Alexandra asked Vanessa to investigate Andrea, to find out who this woman was and what she wanted. Vanessa smiled, that practiced expression that revealed nothing. "I know how to handle this." Vanessa set a trap so clean it seemed like coincidence. She arranged for Alexandra to coincidentally see William leaving the office building with Andrea, timing it perfectly so Alexandra would be returning from a lunch meeting, positioned just right to witness what appeared to be a clandestine encounter. Photos were taken by security cameras Vanessa controlled. The images were leaked into internal group chats as seemingly organic insider information, with commentary suggesting concern about data breaches. Pressure built quickly. Speculation grew. The maintenance technician is exposing company secrets. The quiet one is always the one you should watch. We need to protect ourselves. Alexandra made a decision that was wrong, but completely consistent with her character, her training, her belief that control must be maintained at all costs. She called William into a conference room with Henry and Amanda present as witnesses, establishing a formal tone, creating an official record. Her voice was ice when she spoke. "Explain your relationship with Andrea." William's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Are you selling information?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. William felt insulted not by the words themselves, but by what they revealed about how little Alexandra thought of him, how quickly she'd assumed the worst, how thoroughly she'd judged him without evidence or trial. He didn't beg. He didn't defend. He only said, his voice quiet and steady, "I work here because my daughter needs health insurance." The statement was simple truth, not a plea, not an excuse, just the reason he endured disrespect and invisibility and unjust suspicion. Louisa needed medical coverage. That need outweighed his pride. Alexandra didn't soften her tone. If anything, his refusal to grovel irritated her further. "From now on, you follow the schedule I set. No exceptions. No special accommodations. If you can't commit fully to this company, perhaps you should reconsider your employment." The ultimatum was clear. Submit completely or leave. William looked straight at Alexandra for a long moment, seeing her clearly, maybe for the first time, understanding that this woman would never see him as anything but a problem to be managed or eliminated. He made his choice. "You never knew who I was," he said quietly, "but now you want to decide how I live." He pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket, already prepared, already signed, his resignation letter. He placed it on the conference table between them, effective immediately. He walked out without waiting for a response, leaving Alexandra staring at the letter, feeling like she'd won and lost something simultaneously. Louisa heard her father say he was quitting when he picked her up from school that afternoon, his voice carefully controlled but his hands tight on the steering wheel. She panicked with the pure terror only a 7-year-old who'd already lost one parent could feel. "Because of her?" Louisa asked quietly, meaning Alexandra, meaning the woman who'd made her father's face look like that. William didn't answer. But silence was an answer. Louisa turned to look out the window, her small face set in an expression far too old for her years. That night, the company's systems began showing unusual errors. Small things at first, glitches that could be explained away as normal technical hiccups. But the pattern suggested something else. It was as if someone was slowly removing the safety brake piece by piece, letting the machinery spin toward inevitable disaster. For the first time in her adult life, Alexandra followed someone like a human being rather than a CEO executing a strategy. She drove herself to William's neighborhood without security, without announcement, without any clear plan beyond a need to see, to understand, to know what she'd missed. She saw him carrying Louisa up the apartment stairs in a building that had seen better decades, its paint faded and its hallways smelling of old cooking and cheaper lives. The unit was small but clean and warm, visible through windows that faced the street. There were books on shelves and drawings on the refrigerator, and a life built from love rather than money. Andrea appeared at the door, carrying a briefcase full of documents, and Alexandra watched from her car, feeling like a spy, feeling ridiculous and obsessed and unable to look away. There was no romantic scene. Nothing that suggested intimacy or passion or the relationship Alexandra had imagined. Only papers spread across a small kitchen table, appointments discussed in professional tones, reports reviewed with the focus of people working toward a common goal. Alexandra moved closer, staying in shadows, straining to hear through the partially open window. Andrea was speaking. "If you withdraw your testimony, George wins. He'll bury the evidence, restructure the shell companies, and hundreds of people will lose their jobs when he asset strips the company for personal profit." William looked at Louisa, who was coloring at the table, oblivious to the adult conversation happening around her. His voice was heavy. "I've endured enough humiliation. I won't let my daughter grow up in a place full of lies." Alexandra felt the world shift beneath her feet as understanding crashed over her in waves. Andrea wasn't a lover. She was a lawyer, an internal auditor hired secretly by someone outside the current power structure to investigate financial irregularities. Her mission: investigate George for financial manipulation and intellectual property theft, for schemes that could destroy the company Alexandra had sacrificed everything to lead. William was a witness because he'd had technical work stolen from him, his innovations taken and credited to others, his contributions erased from records, while the profits they generated enriched people who'd done nothing to earn them. He kept evidence: documents, emails, timestamps, code with his signature embedded where only he would know to look. The woman Alexandra had been jealous of wasn't a romantic rival. She was the key that could topple Alexandra's own CFO, expose corruption at the highest levels, save the company from internal sabotage. And Alexandra had driven away the one person who could help. The next morning felt like walking into a disaster that had been waiting to happen. The company's warehouse and coordination systems experienced cascading failures, each one triggering the next in a horrible chain reaction. Orders went missing. Shipments were misdirected. The inventory management system showed numbers that couldn't possibly be accurate. A major contract worth millions, ready for signing that afternoon, was suddenly threatened because nobody could guarantee delivery schedules. George performed like a seasoned actor, appearing in the executive suite with concerned expressions and helpful suggestions. He blamed the weak technical department, the lack of proper oversight, the failure to invest in robust systems. He implied, with perfect deniability, William quit at just the right time. There must be a problem we didn't see. The suggestion planted suspicion that William had sabotaged systems before leaving, covering his tracks, leaving chaos in his wake. Alexandra felt cornered by circumstances beyond her control. Otis called her personally. his voice tight with anger and disappointment. "If this contract fails, the board will have serious questions about your leadership. We cannot afford this kind of operational failure." The threat was clear. Deliver results or be replaced. Vanessa proposed a solution with the smooth confidence of someone who'd anticipated this crisis. "We blame everything on William. Frame it as him sabotaging systems after his termination. Protect the company's image. Move forward." The suggestion made Alexandra feel sick, but she couldn't immediately articulate why. It was practical, strategic, exactly the kind of damage control she would have approved a week ago. Henry grew suspicious, his operational mind recognizing patterns others missed. "This error cascade looks deliberately triggered. The failures are too perfectly timed, too comprehensively destructive to be random technical issues." He pulled Amanda aside, shared his concerns quietly. Together, they started digging through access logs, finding anomalies that shouldn't exist. Amanda discovered someone had accessed William's old locked file recently, the one marked confidential, the one that should have required multiple authorization levels. The digital signature that appeared on the access log belonged to George, time-stamped 2 hours before the systems started failing. The pieces were assembling into a picture neither of them wanted to see but couldn't ignore. Alexandra made a choice that cost her everything she'd built her identity around. She found William without bodyguards, without the CEO armor she usually wore like protective gear. She went to his apartment building alone, knocked on his door like a normal person asking for help rather than a powerful executive issuing commands. William opened the door, and his expression closed immediately when he saw her. Not anger, just exhaustion. The look of someone who'd been hurt too many times to risk hoping. "I need you to come back," Alexandra said, the words harder than any business negotiation she'd ever conducted. "Temporarily. To help fix the systems. The company is failing." William didn't soften easily. His voice was flat. "I save the company, and tomorrow you forget who I am again? How does this story end differently?" Louisa appeared behind her father, standing in the hallway, watching this woman who'd made her daddy sad. Her small face was guarded, protective. Alexandra did the hardest thing of her life, something her pride had never allowed before. She admitted fault, without qualifications or excuses. "I was wrong to judge you. I was wrong about Andrea. I was wrong about everything." The words felt like glass in her throat, but she forced them out because they were true, and truth mattered more than pride. She promised something specific, concrete, not empty words meant to manipulate. "I'll restore authorship credit to your work. All of it. I'll protect you from being scapegoated for this crisis. And if George is guilty of what Andrea suspects, I'll stand beside you when we confront him, regardless of what it costs me." William studied her face, looking for deception, finding only desperation and something that might be genuine regret. He set his conditions. Andrea participates fully. No one gets silenced or sidelined. Henry and Amanda serve as witnesses to everything we discuss, and if we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no protecting people who deserve consequences. Alexandra agreed to everything without hesitation. William discovered the back door in the system that night, working through code line by line, finding the trap door that only someone who'd installed it would know existed. The modification was elegant, subtle, designed to trigger failures that looked like natural technical degradation rather than deliberate sabotage. The code signature led straight to the finance department's server access, and William recognized the style, the specific syntax choices that marked it as clearly as a fingerprint. Over the next 2 days, William and Andrea reconstructed the chain of events with methodical precision. The system failures were deliberate activations, triggered remotely using credentials that shouldn't have existed outside the IT security team. The goal became clear through financial records Andrea had subpoenaed through legal channels. crash the company's stock price through operational disasters, creating panic that would let George and his partners acquire controlling shares at artificially low prices. It was a hostile takeover disguised as technical incompetence, and it had nearly worked. Amanda provided deleted emails, recovered from backup servers, showing George coordinating with external parties, timing the sabotage to coincide with contract deadlines, planning the acquisition down to specific dollar amounts and percentage points. Henry provided the technical report with altered authorship, along with 6 other examples he'd found during sleepless nights of searching. William's innovations, worth millions in efficiency, improvements, and cost savings, all stolen and attributed to George's department. The board meeting assembled every key player in the same room for the first time. Otis, George, Vanessa, Alexandra, Henry, Andrea, and William. The air was thick with tension and unspoken accusations. George attacked immediately, going on offense before anyone could question him, directing his contempt at the easiest target. "What is he doing here?" George gestured at William like he was something unpleasant tracked in on someone's shoe. "He's just a maintenance technician with a grudge and no credibility." William didn't rise to the bait. He answered calmly, his voice steady and clear. "That's right. I am just a maintenance technician. But that's exactly why I know which screws in this company were twisted by whom, which systems were modified, and which trails were covered." Andrea stepped forward, professional and prepared, and began presenting evidence with the precision of a prosecutor building an airtight case. Access accounts that shouldn't exist, digital signatures that proved who triggered the sabotage, money trails leading to offshore accounts and shell companies registered under names that connected back to George through a web of corporate structures designed to hide ownership. Vanessa panicked, her composure cracking for the first time. She tried to interrupt, voice rising, attempting to discredit Andrea's credentials or question the legality of the investigation. Alexandra cut her off with a gesture. "Let her finish." The evidence was devastating and undeniable. George had been systematically stealing intellectual property for 3 years, crediting innovations to his department while the actual creators remained invisible. He'd been embezzling through false consulting contracts and inflated vendor payments. And when he'd feared discovery, he'd attempted to crash the company so he could buy it cheap and own what he'd been stealing piecemeal. Otis's face went from red to pale to something approaching gray as the implications became clear. The liability, the lawsuits, the regulatory scrutiny, the complete destruction of the board's credibility if this became public. Alexandra stood, drawing every eye in the room. She looked at George with something close to pity. "I once failed to see William. I treated him as invisible because I trusted the wrong people to tell me what mattered. But today, I see exactly who the real saboteur is." She turned to Otis. "I'm calling for George's immediate suspension pending criminal investigation. I'm requesting a full forensic audit of all financial operations under his oversight, and I'm recommending we cooperate fully with law enforcement rather than attempting to handle this internally." George was escorted from the building within the hour, his access revoked, his office sealed, his carefully constructed empire collapsing in the span of a single afternoon. Vanessa resigned before she could be fired, recognizing that her association with George was now toxic. The contract was saved through emergency intervention and Alexandra's personal guarantee of performance. The company survived, damaged but intact. When everything finished, when the room had cleared and only Alexandra and William remained, he said something that left her standing silent. "I didn't come back for you. I came back because Louisa deserves to live in a decent world, and I couldn't teach her about integrity if I walked away when people needed help." The words weren't cruel, just honest, and they cut deeper than any insult could have. Alexandra changed for real over the following months, not just in words, but in actions that restructured how the company operated. She made recognition of contributions transparent, implementing systems where work was credited to actual creators with public acknowledgement and appropriate compensation. She established a fund supporting single parents and caregivers, managed by Amanda, providing flexible scheduling and emergency backup care. She created procedures preventing blame from flowing downward onto the powerless, requiring executives to take responsibility for failures in their departments rather than scapegoating lower-level employees. She apologized to William privately, in his small apartment with Louisa coloring at the table, not to be forgiven, but to return his dignity, to acknowledge specifically how she'd failed him and what she was doing differently. William received exactly what he needed, though it took him time to trust it was real. Not a prestigious title to show off, but stability for Louisa, respect from colleagues, fair compensation. He was offered an appropriate position as Senior Technical Project Leader, reporting directly to Henry, with schedule flexibility built into his contract rather than treated as special accommodation. Louisa became the door that opened emotions neither adult knew how to access directly. Alexandra learned how to talk with the 7-year-old, not as a CEO managing subordinates, but as an adult learning from a child's clarity. She didn't buy expensive toys to win affection. She simply sat down at their kitchen table one evening and asked, "How do you want your father to be treated?" Louisa considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. Finally, she said something simple but precious. "Don't make him disappear. Don't make him sad. Just see him." The romance developed slowly but surely, following logic rather than formula, building on foundation of respect rather than passion. Alexandra didn't confess feelings in melodramatic declarations. She simply showed up consistently, proving through action that she'd changed. She gave William a work schedule designed to always allow him to pick up Louisa, never making him choose between his child and his career. She personally signed documents confirming his ownership of technical projects, restoring years of stolen credit. She included him in strategic meetings, valuing his input, treating his expertise as essential rather than optional. William finally opened his heart one evening when they were walking Louisa home from a school event, the three of them moving slowly through streets lit by street lamps and early stars. "I used to think you didn't know I existed," he said quietly. Alexandra stopped walking, turned to face him. "I was wrong. And I don't want to be wrong again." The kiss happened naturally, without dramatic music or perfect lighting, just two people finding each other after almost missing completely. The final scene showed William, Louisa, and Alexandra eating dinner at an ordinary restaurant months later. Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place with good food and reasonable prices. Louisa laughed at something her father said, her face bright and unguarded. William laughed with her, the sound free and genuine. Alexandra watched them both, not with CEO eyes anymore, not analyzing or calculating or maintaining distance. She watched with the eyes of a woman who'd finally learned how to cherish what mattered, who'd discovered that being seen was more valuable than being powerful, that love built on respect lasted longer than anything built on control. She reached across the table and took William's hand. He squeezed back, holding on, choosing to stay.